I thought I knew my partner, until I found out about their secret family. The first time I felt something was off about James was a Wednesday evening. He was late coming home. Again. It wasn't unusual for him to stay late at the office, but lately he'd been acting different, distant. When he finally walked in, I noticed his shirt was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and he smelled faintly of perfume. Not my perfume. Long day? I asked, watching him closely. Yeah, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Deadlines, meetings, you know how it is. He kissed my forehead absent-mindedly before heading straight to the shower. No dinner, no conversation. That was when I first felt it. The gnawing, whispering suspicion that something wasn't right. A few days later, while James was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I respected his privacy, but something about this message made me look. Unknown number. Are you coming home tonight? Jason's been asking for you. Jason? Who the hell was Jason? I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. My mind raced with possibilities. I knew James didn't have any close friends with that name. My breath hitched as a terrifying thought crossed my mind. I waited until he stepped out of the bathroom, towel slung around his waist, his face relaxed. Who's Jason? I asked, holding up his phone. His face changed in an instant. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched. What? I repeated my question, my heart pounding. He reached for his phone, but I pulled it back. Who is Jason? I demanded, louder this time. James exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. It's complicated. That was not the answer I wanted. The next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. James had told me he was meeting a client, but instead of heading to his usual office downtown, he drove 20 minutes out of the city to a quiet suburban neighborhood. I parked a few houses down and watched as he pulled into a driveway. A woman stepped outside, her face lighting up as he approached. And then a little boy, maybe 4 years old, ran into his arms. My vision blurred. My breath hitched. I couldn't move. James wasn't just keeping a secret. He was living a double life. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I watched James lift the little boy into his arms, holding him close like a father would. I blinked rapidly, trying to process what I was seeing. The woman standing beside them had long, dark hair and a soft, familiar smile, like the kind James used to give me. Who was she? Who was he? And more importantly, who was I to James? I sat in my car, frozen as they disappeared into the house. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, to go home and wait for James to lie to me again. But I was done being lied to. I got out of the car and marched toward the house, each step heavy with anger, pain, and 1,000 unspoken questions. By the time I reached the door, my hands were shaking. I lifted my fist and knocked. A few seconds later, the woman opened it. She blinked at me, confused. Yes? Before I could answer, I heard James's voice from inside. Who is it, Sarah? Sarah. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. He had never mentioned a Sarah before. James appeared behind her, his face draining of color the second he saw me. Ava? His voice cracked. I stared at him, my chest burning. Do you want to explain, or should I? Sarah's eyes darted between us. James, who is she? I laughed bitterly. Yeah, James. Who am I? James swallowed hard, stepping forward as if to calm me down. Ava, please, not here. But I was past caring about privacy. You told me you were working late, that you had deadlines. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to stay strong. But instead you were here, with them, with your son. Sarah gasped. James, what is she talking about? James exhaled shakily, rubbing his hands over his face. I was going to tell you. Both of you. I shook my head. When? After how many more years? How many more lies? The little boy, Jason, peeked out from behind the couch, his small face filled with confusion. Daddy? The word shattered something inside me. James turned to Sarah, his expression desperate. I swear, I can explain. Sarah's face twisted in realization, her eyes welling with tears. You've been lying to both of us, she whispered. James looked between us, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Because there were no words that could fix this. There was only the truth. And the truth had already destroyed everything. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Sarah's lips trembled, and I could see the moment realization sank into her. She wasn't the only one James had betrayed. I wasn't the only one he had lied to. And Jason, his own son, stood there watching, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. I took a slow, unsteady breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. How long, James? My voice was hoarse. How long have you been playing both of us? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Ava, it's complicated. I let out a bitter laugh. No, it's actually pretty simple. You have two families. You've been lying to me this entire time. Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. Wait, you told me you and Ava were over years ago. I snapped my head toward her. Years? You've known him for years? Sarah blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. James and I met 5 years ago. We've been together ever since. The room tilted. 5 years. James and I had been together for 6. I staggered back, gripping the wall to keep from collapsing. James. My voice barely came out. We got engaged 3 months ago. Sarah gasped, stepping back as if she had been struck. Engaged? She turned to him, horror spreading across her face. You said marriage wasn't for you. You told me you weren't ready. James rubbed his face with both hands, his entire body shaking. I never meant for it to be like this. Sarah let out a choked laugh. Like this? You have a fiancé and a son and never thought we'd find out? Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to break in front of him. Not now. Not ever. Did you love me? I whispered. Or was I just a backup plan? James's face crumbled. Ava, don't answer me, I snapped, my voice shaking. He looked at me, at Sarah, at Jason. His face twisted with regret, but regret wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Sarah's breathing was ragged, her fists clenched at her sides. Get out. James's head snapped toward her. What? You heard me? She spat. Get out of my house. For the first time, James looked truly afraid. Sarah, please, I don't care what you have to say, she shouted, her voice breaking. You lied to me. You lied to her. And worst of all, you lied to Jason. Jason flinched at the sound of his mother's voice, shrinking into the couch. My heart clenched at the sight of him. He was innocent in all of this. James looked between us, desperation in his eyes. I can fix this. No, I whispered. You can't. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time I saw it, the realization that he had lost everything. I turned on my heel and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what came next. But I did know one thing. I would never let anyone fool me like that again. I don't remember much of the drive home. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The streetlights blurred past me, streaks of yellow and white cutting through the darkness. My mind was a storm. 6 years. 6 years of my life wasted on a man who had another family. A woman who thought she was his only one. A little boy who had no idea his father was a liar and a cheat. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my body felt numb. I barely registered turning off the ignition, stepping out of the car, locking the door behind me. Inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty, because it had never really been ours. It had always been mine. And James? He had only been passing through. The aftermath. The next few days were a blur. James called. A lot. At first, I ignored him, let every call go to voicemail, deleted every text without reading it. But then he showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer, but I needed to look him in the eyes one last time. I pulled open the door. There he stood, looking like a broken man, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept in days. Good. Ava, he said softly, like I was some delicate thing he didn't want to shatter. Too late. What do you want, James? My voice was hollow. He exhaled, running a hand through his messy hair. I need to explain. I let out a bitter laugh. Explain? You think there's an explanation that makes any of this okay? He looked down, ashamed. I never meant to hurt you. I clenched my fists. You didn't just hurt me, James. You ruined everything. I gave you my heart, my trust, my future. And the whole time you had another life. James swallowed hard. I was going to tell you, I didn't know how. I stepped forward, lowering my voice. Did you ever love me? His eyes widened. Ava, of course I did. I shook my head. Number, if you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Silence. A long, painful silence. And that was my answer. I'm done, James. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out. I don't want to see you again. I don't want to hear from you again. I don't care where you go or what happens to you. Just stay out of my life. His face twisted with pain, but I didn't care. I didn't feel sorry for him. I stepped back and closed the door in his face. Then, for the first time in days, I let myself cry. For the first few days after shutting James out, I felt empty. I thought I'd feel relieved, even victorious, but instead, there was this dull ache in my chest, like a wound that refused to close. I kept replaying everything in my mind. Every late night at work, every excuse, every time he looked me in the eyes and swore I was the only one. How had I been so blind? But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the questions. How had he kept this a secret for so long? Who else knew? And most importantly, what else was he hiding? I had planned to cut James out of my life completely. But then, a week later, I received an email. Not from James, from Sarah. Subject: I think we need to talk, Ava. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need answers just as much as you do. Something isn't adding up. I thought James was just a liar, but I think there's more to this than we realize. Please meet me. Just once. If you don't want to, I understand. But I think we both deserve the truth. Sarah. I stared at the email, my pulse pounding in my ears. James had already shattered my life. Did I really want to open this wound again? But something in Sarah's message felt off. I hesitated only for a moment before typing back. Subject: I think we need to talk. Where and when? We met at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. When I walked in, I spotted Sarah immediately. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy, her hands gripping a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her together. She looked up as I approached. Ava. I slid into the seat across from her. What do you want to know? She let out a breath, then pulled something from her purse and placed it on the table. A bank statement. At first, I wasn't sure why she was showing me this. Then I saw the transactions. Large sums of money, withdrawn regularly, and not just from her account, from mine. My blood turned to ice. I found these in James's desk, Sarah said. Look at the dates. He was moving money between our accounts for years. I flipped through the papers, my heart racing. The numbers blurred together, but one thing was clear. James wasn't just a liar. He was a thief. A sick feeling crept into my stomach. Where was all this money going? Sarah shook her head. I don't know, but I think he was hiding something bigger than just us. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking as I stared at the papers. James hadn't just betrayed us. He had been using us. And I had a terrifying feeling that we weren't the only ones. I sat there, staring at the bank statements, my heart thudding like a war drum. James had stolen from us. Both of us. "How did you find these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "After you confronted him, I started looking through his things. I found these hidden in a locked drawer in his office." I shook my head. Why would he need so much money? He made good money at his job. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's the thing, Ava." She slid another paper across the table. "He never had a job." I froze. "What?" She nodded grimly. "I called his office after he disappeared. The receptionist had no idea who I was talking about. James never worked there. In fact, he never worked anywhere for the past 5 years. Everything. The business trips, the long hours, the excuses, they were all lies." My breath caught in my throat. If James didn't have a job, how had he been supporting 2 households? Unless... I glanced back at the bank statements. My name. Sarah's name. We had been paying for his entire double life. I felt sick. This wasn't just cheating. This was fraud. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking. I need to go to the police. He can't just... But before I could dial, Sarah grabbed my wrist. "Wait." I stared at her. "Wait? For what?" "He's a criminal, Sarah." She hesitated. "I know, but there's more. I... I found something else." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her pictures. Then she turned the screen toward me. I gasped. It was James, but he wasn't with me. He wasn't with Sarah. He was standing on the porch of a house I didn't recognize, his arms wrapped around another woman, and beside them, 2 kids. Sarah's voice was shaky. "I think we're not the only ones, Ava." I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to breathe. James didn't just have 2 families. He had 3. I exhaled shakily, trying to process what I was seeing. "Who is she?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, but I think we need to find out." My mind raced. If James had stolen from both of us, he was probably stealing from her too. And if he was running from us, how long before he disappeared for good? I clenched my fists. "Then let's find her." Sarah met my gaze, nodding. We weren't going to cry over James anymore. We were going to stop him. Sarah and I sat in my car, parked a few houses down from the address she had found in James's files. The house was quiet, its lights glowing warmly in the evening dusk. It looked normal. Like nothing sinister was happening inside. Like there wasn't a man living a triple life behind those walls. I exhaled sharply. "Are we really doing this?" Sarah nodded. "We need to know the truth." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Then let's end this." We walked up to the front door and knocked. A few moments later, the woman from Sarah's picture answered. She was beautiful, with soft brown eyes and a kind face. The face of someone who had no idea what was about to hit her. "Yes?" she asked, frowning slightly. I swallowed hard. "Hi. I know this is weird, but do you know James?" Her face instantly changed. She stiffened, her fingers tightening around the doorframe. "Who are you?" Sarah stepped forward. "I'm Sarah, and this is Ava." She paused, watching the woman's reaction. "We're James' other fiancé and his other girlfriend." The woman's breath hitched. Her eyes darted between us, her face pale. Then she took a slow step back, shaking her head. "Number that's not, he wouldn't..." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed her the pictures. The woman let out a sharp breath, staggering against the door. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then, before she could say anything else, a deep voice came from inside the house. "Babe, who's at the door?" My stomach dropped. Footsteps. And then there he was, James. His face twisted in confusion the moment he saw us. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at me, at Sarah, then at the woman beside him. And for the first time, I saw it. Fear. He knew. He knew it was over. The woman turned to him, her voice trembling. James. Who are they? James's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Sarah's voice was deadly calm. Go ahead. Tell her, James. He took a step back, then another. I could see his mind racing, looking for a way out. But there was none. Because at that exact moment, police sirens filled the air. I turned just in time to see 2 patrol cars pull up, red and blue lights flashing. Sarah smirked. Oh, did I forget to mention? We called the police. James spun toward me, panic flashing in his eyes. Ava, please, you don't understand. I stared at him coldly. No, James, you don't understand. You didn't just cheat. You stole. You lied. You ruined people's lives. The officers stepped out of their cars, one of them calling out, James Carter? He hesitated for half a second, then ran. But he didn't get far. One of the officers tackled him to the ground, pinning his arms behind his back. James struggled, yelling something I couldn't make out, but the sound of the handcuffs snapping shut was louder. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Sarah squeezed my hand. It's over. James turned his head to look at me, his eyes wild. Ava, please, don't do this. I took a step forward, kneeling slightly so I could meet his eyes. You did this to yourself, I said softly. And with that, I turned away. I didn't look back. James was arrested for fraud, theft, and identity deception. As it turned out, he had drained over $300,000 from Sarah, myself, and the third woman, Emily. Emily was devastated, but in time, she, Sarah, and I formed an odd sort of bond. We had been lied to, manipulated, used. But we weren't victims. We were survivors. And as I walked away from that house, away from the wreckage James had left behind, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I was free.